Ministry is the name of that band with their song called Thieves from an album entitled The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. My name is Jason. This is Hexes and Soldiers episode number 29. Welcome back, everybody. What a week it's been. As far as shout outs, I'd just like to say hey to all the dads out there, as it was Father's Day just this past Sunday. Hope everybody had a good Father's Day. And not a father myself, at least that I know of, so no kids to celebrate that with, but a lot of fathers out there, and I hope you guys had a good one. So, what's new? If you haven't noticed yet, perhaps you will at some point, but I'll just tell you, I've been sick as a dog. In fact, I was bedridden for a better part of a day before yesterday. Not sure what that's all about. I guess rickets or dysentery or something, who knows? All I know is I haven't been this sick since the Reagan era. But I'm feeling better, so back in the saddle. Hopefully, my voice is not too intolerable. Um, Also, listen to another podcast, and I do that from time to time. There are other podcasts, and I enjoy quite a number of them. Listening to Advance After Combat, which I do so regularly, and just like to say thanks to Jason for the shout out. Appreciate that. Also, listen to Guns, Dice, and Butter. So, if you guys are wondering, what podcast do you listen to? Well, there's a couple of them right there. Of course, Guns, Dice, and Butter. Guy does a great job interviewing game designers, and I always find that interesting. A lot of people might find it boring, don't want to listen to a game designer, but I find it interesting, and I don't know. I think it's a great way for these guys to get a little bit of the spotlight, which they deserve. You know, these games wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. So yeah, it's been a big week. What else? Stanley Cup Finals took place, and the freaking LA Kings won, which, good for them, but they just won 2 years ago. Let somebody else win. I was hoping New York would. Whatever. Someday the Blues will win, but it might not be in my lifetime, so I won't be holding my breath. And it looks like we made it through another Friday the 13th without a hitch, so that's always good. Game of Thrones season finale came and went, and what an emotional roller coaster ride that was. Jeez, almost felt nauseous from the ups and downs. Plus, it's the last episode, and that's sad as well. But my goodness, what a show! And of course, seeing the snow and winter scenes really made me pine for winter, and especially the north. Being stuck here in the south, I doubt I'll ever see anything even remotely similar to winter-like conditions. But I sure love winter, as you guys probably already know, and made the best of it when I lived in the north, especially growing up. Sled riding, all the typical conventional stuff. In fact, I remember one year when I was in junior college, old enough to know better, bored, but got together with a couple friends of mine, found a sled, found a snowsuit, and stuffed it full to make it look like a person. And I don't know why I thought this would be a good idea or entertaining or funny. Actually, it's shame on me. It's probably dangerous. In fact, okay, it is. But we went to an overpass, and this might sound familiar if you've seen the movie The Good Son, because when I saw that movie, I thought, holy crap, they stole my idea. But went to an overpass over a major highway, over the median in the middle, and stuck this stuffed snowsuit, which looked like a person, onto the sled and ducked down so nobody could see. And then it had just snowed, of course. There's snow everywhere. I don't even think that many cars were out. It was too dangerous. But just launched the thing with the guy on the sled over the overpass down to the median below. We're snickering, we're laughing, we think that's great. And you want to peek your head over and see where it landed, and of course it landed in the median, which was our intention. And lo and behold, somebody had seen this alleged person sled right off the overpass into the median and had pulled over to the side of the road and was running towards the snow person laying there. I didn't know what to do, so we just ran off. I don't know. I guess it looked real because the guy pulled over and was running after the person, or what he thought was a person. Like I said, shame on me. Could have caused an accident. I don't know what I was thinking, but thought it was funny at the time, and felt bad later. Ran off, came back, and there was a police car there stuffing the faux person into the trunk. So that was the end of that. But anyway, missed the snow, missed winter. Would never do something like that again. But and also, what Flag Day came and went. Does anybody celebrate Flag Day? And what do you do? What do you do on Flag Day? I'm not sure. Unfurl your flag and hang it in front of your house, perhaps. Um, I don't know. And then summer solstice, of course, right around the corner. So anybody that celebrates that, I guess midnight, build a bonfire and construct a wooden effigy of some runes or a wicker person and burn them. I don't know. Summer solstice. What is that? The longest day of the year? Is that what that means? So summer solstice right around the corner. So anybody that celebrates that, you can gear up for it. And then I'd also like to get a conspiracy theory rolling if I could. Now, if you look at the boxes that M&P produces their games, you'll notice there's a flag. Speaking of flags, you'll notice there's a flag on all of them. Well, nearly all of them. And I think it has something to do with Made in America or something to that effect. But I noticed the other day on accident, if you look at Red Star Rising, that game, it doesn't have one. Why is that? Now, I'm sure there's any number of theories why that might be. Um, Probably means nothing at all, or that could be a sign of something. It's a cryptic sign of which MMP has not apparently released the meaning, but I'm going to dig deeper and get to the bottom of this conspiracy theory and see what I can come up with. Um, Perhaps it might lead to the second gunman on the grassy knoll, who knows? But I'll take that road as far as it goes. And then also, I'd like to say, a gentleman named Sergeant Steiner, you might check his blog site out. The guy's been plugging away at it for a while, and it's very succinct, to the point. He doesn't stray off the topic too much. Very nice visual diary of what the guy has been gaming over the years, and quite enjoyable to look at. So if you get time, um, pull the car over at Sergeant Steiner's blog site and take a look. And then apparently, Lock and Load will be announcing something major soon. That's all I got. If any of you have watched Hipshot or Kevin Sharp's latest post, he has announced something similar. I guess Lock and Load has unofficially announced Kevin as their ambassador to the gaming community, which I'm perfectly fine with. But he made a big announcement, Kev did, and basically it was a big announcement announcing a big announcement. So just stay tuned for a big announcement. That's all I got there. And keep an eye on Lock and Load or Kevin Sharp's site. So, and finally, or almost finally, I'd encourage you to check out Mercury Games. These are the guys that released Guns of Gettysburg, and that game may not have been released otherwise because Bowen Simmons, which is the guy that did Napoleon's Triumph and the Marengo one as well, was having some health issues. And I don't know that this thing would have got released, but Mercury Games got a hold of him, picked it up, released it, and appreciate that. But it looks like they also have a game called Orange Revolution that's coming out. And this would be the first title in what they call the Real Untold Stories of History series. It's a block card driven game that pits Viktor Yushchenko against Viktor Yanukovych, and the Orange Revolution puts you into the revolution with its tense thematic gameplay, whether campaigning, attempting assassinations, or drumming up protesters to the Maidan. The many varied options will ensure each game is different, and with 5 total turns, the game is playable in about 19 to 120 minutes. It's pretty specific. What if it goes to 121 minutes? Anyway, for those unfamiliar with the series, Orange Revolution is played on a game board depicting the many oblasts or regions that comprise the Ukraine. Now, each region can have maybe 1 to 11 influence points placed there. Cards are used to move blocks and leaders from region to region, add influence points, exploit events, and bring protesters and militia to the Maidan. Blocks representing political forces such as Pora, avid supporters, and government forces battle for the hearts and minds of the Ukrainian people. Blocks need to be present in a region to add influence points or for a leader to hold a rally in a region. The Maidan may be activated during the game, leading to a sub-game of amassing supporters and militia, and the blue forces will have to choose to crack down on the orange forces or allow the dangerous but historical peaceful protest to swell. Will you bring Tulia, Timoshenko, or Yoshenko to the Maidan to draw more crowds, or use them to rally across the nation? And that would be Orange Revolution from Mercury Games. And I only mention this because it's arguable whether or not this would fall under the definition of a war game. But I applaud them for taking this unconventional left hand approach to a game topic, and it is timely, and I guess you could say important. That's Mercury Games, and that is the Orange Revolution. And that brings us to another game that's kind of off the beaten path, but still a war game, I guess you'd say. This is called 1944 Race to the Rhine, and the game's based on historical events of the year 1944. Players in the roles of Allied commanders take part in a true race to the Rhine. Whoever reaches the river first wins the game and ends World War II before Christmas. But time is short, since the Axis defense is getting stronger and stronger, and the window of opportunity may not be open for long. Each player controls 3 or 4 corps, and players move in turns. During each turn, players may take 2 actions, move their corps, and fight a battle if they encounter Axis troops, get supplies, get transport trucks, and make use of their air supremacy. Cross the Rhine River first and you win. Each of these corps needs the following: gas to move, ammo to fight Axis units that are met along the way, and food to prevent soldiers from, well, getting hungry. Players must not only play the role of commander but also of quartermaster in order to reach the Rhine before the others. During their march, players' corps gain help from the French resistance movement, find abandoned Axis supplies, and meet crowds of civilians who may be celebrating the liberation or might just demand food to feed the hungry. Will you use your transport capacity to send fuel to make your corps move faster? Or will you transport ammo to help them win against Axis troops met along the way? Will you lead like Patton and bend all the safety rules? Or like Monty make slow but certain progress? And don't forget about food for your soldiers, because if the supply check comes, it'll be too late. Keep in mind that your situation will only get worse as the Axis defense will become stronger with each mile you advance toward the Rhine. And of course, this will come with your rule book, about 16 pages, 22 by 33 inch game board, wooden blocks in 3 different colors, deck of cards, some more wooden pieces representing gas barrels, ammo, food, and transport trucks, some counter sheets, stickers for blocks, some dice, and some plastic zip bags. So there's 1944 Race to the Rhine. Brings us to somewhat of an after action report, or rather slash game review. I mentioned that I had pulled the trigger on Combat Commander Europe. Finally, we can all breathe a sigh of relief. Now I can, for once and for all, figure out what the big appeal is, and now I better understand what the big appeal is, and it's a game that deserves the majority of the attention that it's been getting. A lot of people like it, and I see why. Now, as I play this thing, there's things I like, but there's also things, of course, that I don't like. And I like overall the way the game plays. Combat is handled nicely. There's some similarities, slight similarities to Fighting Formations, Gross Deutschland, which is this designer's other game. Nothing too major, but there's some slight resemblances. Now, there's the things that I don't like. I'm not sure how I feel about the flow of the game. Now, there's no set turn order. The actions you take are based on the cards you have available in your hand, and here's where my major gripe is. There's going to be times when you want to do something and you can't because you don't have that card. I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I don't like it. It's something I can live with, but it's something that rubs me the wrong way. And then, so if you need a card that you don't have, you can discard a number of cards and draw some new ones, but then you forfeit your turn. And then you also have these events that come up. The game doesn't use dice. Printed on each card is two symbols of dice, and these represent any number you might need, random number. So instead of rolling the dice, you just draw a card. But then there are times when an event will pop up, and I simultaneously like and don't like this. I like that it breaks up monotony and it adds chaos and it adds uncertainty, but I don't like that it breaks up the fluidity of the thing. There's things that I'm in the middle of. There's things that I want to roll through and get to the outcome of, but then you have this other thing physically interjecting itself into the middle of what you're doing. I don't know how to explain it. I like it, but I don't like it. Again, it's something I can live with. Overall, I like the game. I'll play it. I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to sell it. It's fun. So yeah, if I was to grade it, I don't know, definitely a B. Pretty strict when it comes to giving something a 10 or an A. I reserve that strictly for advanced squad leader, but definitely a B. It's good stuff. So anybody that is still was like me and on the fence or thought, nah, don't need another World War II squad level game. Um, well, you don't know what you're missing because you haven't played it. So pick it up, pull the trigger on this. You'll be happy. It's well worth the money. I think I got mine for $50, free shipping, something like that. That's I can live with that. So Combat Commander Europe, I'm officially happy with. Good stuff. That brings us to I don't know if I'd call this a top 10 list. It's definitely a 10 list. And I will have a number one, and I'll specify that at the end. But it's more or less 10 games or expansions that you can play to experience what it was like to fight in Stalingrad. And I'll start at the bottom with number 10 and say that um, when it comes to ASL, there's plenty of good stuff. When it comes to Stalingrad, you've got Red Barricades, which is a expansion module, as well as Valor of the Guards. I've played both, and I like both. Couple gripes about Valor of the Guards is it's a little more telescoped out in scale. You get a bigger portion of Stalingrad, but at the same time, the you don't get the zoomed in map board that the Red Barricades has. Where you've got a factory that takes up 15 hexes type thing. Um, each has their own benefits. I like them both. If you don't play ASL though, it doesn't do you any good. If you do play ASL, grab them both up. Valor of the Guards, I think you can still get fairly cheaply. Red Barricades, that thing's out of print. Been out of print for a while. Don't hold your breath for a reprint. You're gonna pay a lot of money for an out of print copy, but if you're a diehard ASL fan, gotta have it. Red Barricades is not something you cannot have on your ASL shelf. That brings us to number 8, and Combat Commander Battle Pack number 2, Stalingrad. Took a look at this thing, and not bad. Yeah, you could do worse. Combat Commander, decent game, and how good of them to release a Stalingrad expansion as fighting in Stalingrad is some pretty hectic and exciting stuff. So anybody that is a Combat Commander fan, pick this up, and you can do some Stalingrad fighting. Battle for Stalingrad. This thing came out in 2014. Dan Viersen Games, of course, designed by Dan Viersen. A little more light, but well, decent. So if you're interested in all things Dan Viersen, you might take a look at this. You also have Battle for Stalingrad, not to be confused with the Dan Viersen game, but this came out in 1980. SPI game was re-released. It's the re-released edition that I have by another company, but John Hill game, and big fan of John Hill. If you're interested in some pretty intense, involved fighting regarding Stalingrad, pick this up. Looks like this is a battalion company level simulation. So Battle for Stalingrad, the John Hill game, also has, as I've mentioned in the past, Some pretty interesting game mechanics when it comes to movement and combat. Then you have the Beast, Streets of Stalingrad, the third edition specifically, which came out in 2003. L2 Design Group, Dana Lombardi, and Art Lupinacci. This thing is apparently the grail game of Stalingrad games. Now, you're going to need a lot of friends to play this. If you want to do this solo, it's going to take you a while. It's going to take a lot of patience. It can be done, but it's just that. It's going to take time and patience, and it's going to move slow. So I don't know if I would recommend this unless you're a collector or you have a wargaming group and you guys want to tackle this together. I don't have this. It's been on my grail list, but again, I've lived without it this long. I can go a little longer. It's one of those games that I'm going to get, open up, stare at, fondle the components, box it back up, and put it on the shelf. So if that's all I'm going to do with it, I'd rather spend my money on something I'm going to play. So I've held off on it. And then that brings us to the Hell of Stalingrad, 2009, Clash of Arms Games, Stephen Kunliff. This is a historical card-driven game that simulates, of course, the massive urban battle that changed the course of World War II. Uses revolutionary mechanics to put players directly in the action as you commit division formations and battalion units. Now, the focus of the game is combat over colorful building cards representing actual Stalingrad locations that are bitterly contested during the battle. And you got stuff like the grain elevator, the tractor factory, and Pavlov's house, all of which and more I will be getting into shortly. The German commander will use his disciplined veterans and German doctrines to batter through the fortified strongholds and reach the Volga River. Assisting him will be Panzer Divisions, Kampfgruppen, and elite pioneer assault teams. The Soviet commander must hold the city with a battered army of patriotic conscripts. Reinforcements must brave Luftwaffe attacks as they attempt to cross the Volga River and reach Stalingrad. Those who survive will be thrown into the carnage, and the Soviets must hold out and prevent the invaders from capturing the entire city at all costs. The tide of the war depends on their resolve. So that's the Hell of Stalingrad, and not necessarily my cup of tea, but might be yours. So if it is, pick that up and give it a whirl. And then I added Stalingrad Pocket, and technically this is not a Stalingrad game per se. It deals more with Stalingrad and the surrounding area, quite a bit of the surrounding area. But it's a great overview, and Standard Combat Series 1996, Mr. Dean Essig. So if you are looking for more of an overview when it comes to this, pick this up, and it's something that is relatively easy to learn. If you're a newbie, I wouldn't recommend it perhaps, but if you've been playing war games for a while, you should have no problem with this. And guess what? If you learn the standard combat series rules for this, you can play the rest of the games in the series. How does that sound? Pretty good deal, huh? That brings us to number two. Oh, and I should say I have this game and have played it and liked it. That brings us to number two, Storm over Stalingrad. Tetsuya Nakamura, 2006, MMP. I've played this game and it's okay. I like the subject matter. I like the idea, but it's extremely light. And this is something that you would play if you don't have a lot of time. If you're playing, say, with somebody that is not relatively overly familiar with war games, perhaps you want to bring them into the fold. This might be a gateway game. Set this up, play it. You can knock it out in a hurry. You can get relatively schnockered from drinks and still be able to play this no problem if that's your thing. That brings us to number one, and this is a true number one. The rest you could jumble around how you will. They're not necessarily in any order, but I would say this is a true number one out of the bunch. And this is Turning Point Stalingrad, the Avalon Hill game. It came out in 1989 by Don Greenwood, and this is of the Area Movement series. And what I'll do is hold off on going into this in depth and come back to it after the Situation Room, which we are entering as I speak. But just before we enter, I'd also like to add one last thing. and say that there are a number of ways to determine if you have too many games. And of course, the most obvious is the way your significant other looks at you when another one shows up in the mail, as well as the amount of space that is being currently eaten up by your shelves of games. But another sign that you might have too many war games, and one that is perhaps more easily overlooked, is when you say, "I have that game." You ever notice yourself saying that? I am guilty of that. It comes up in conversation. You're talking about something, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I have that game." Notice what you said. I have that game. You didn't say you played it. That's a sign. And unfortunately, I say that quite a bit. So, gonna have to start playing some of these games that I have. So there's a sign, and if you find yourself saying that quite a bit, then you might want to hold off on game purchases and bust out the ones you have. So that's that. That brings us to the situation room, and inside you'll find a situation map. I'll ask you to open those up and have a seat. And on these situation maps is Stalingrad. So when it comes to Stalingrad, a lot of you are perhaps familiar with Stalingrad and the action that took place there. Some of you perhaps less so. I am not for a second going to pretend to act like I will be able to cover every minute detail of this battle. Is just not possible. So I'll try and gloss over the basic stuff and then do kind of a tour guide through the city, and we'll hit the major landmarks. So we're looking at 1942, and when it comes to this city, looking back on it, I guess I didn't really think about it in the past, but why did Hitler decide that Stalingrad needed to be taken? You could argue that in order to reach the Caucasus and the oil fields therein, you had to take Stalingrad. Well, did you? Because what he did was split into a V and have part of the army head into Stalingrad, and then the other part head south into the Caucasus. But why didn't he just circumvent Stalingrad and head to the Caucasus alone and just say hell with Stalingrad? I don't know. I mean, is there really any strategic value in taking that city, or is it just pride's sake? Is it a city that bears Stalin's name, and Hitler's thinking, if I take this city, it's going to be a real gut blow to Stalin. It's a city that is his namesake, and it's fallen, and he's going to hang his head, and morale's going to drop significantly, and people are going to lose their will to fight. I don't know if this is what Hitler was thinking. Perhaps it was, or perhaps Hitler, for one reason or another, got it in his head this city was perhaps more strategically valuable than it was. I'm not sure. But it seems like he placed, at least initially, too much value in the city, and definitely once he was there, overemphasized the value of taking this city. But such that it was, Mr. Paulus gets sent in there with the Sixth Army, and Hitler thinks that this city's going to fall in a few days. This is, at this point in the war, 1942, this is still how confident Hitler is. He thinks he's going to roll into Stalingrad and take this thing in a matter of days. I mean, I don't know what's wrong with this guy. And his generals, do they not? Was there nobody there that said, "Are you nuts?" and slap him and say, "Wake up"? Or did they believe it too? I guess you could look at it like if you capture Stalingrad, you can cut off some vital supply lines that were being used and crossing over the Volga into the city. But other than that, I'm not really sure what the whole Stalingrad appeal was. Yeah, so Hitler thinks he's going to take this city in a number of days. And that is in fact the case, except perhaps more days than he thought, 200 days. And if you would have told Hitler from the start that, you know what, you're going to be there for 200 days, would he have still done it? I don't know. But you couldn't have told him that. He wouldn't have believed you anyway. And in the end, not only would he lose the whole city, but an entire army as well. So again, if he had it to do over, would he have done it? He probably would have done it again. You know, the guy's a nut. So the initial assault, when it comes to taking the city, is fairly conventional. You send in planes, bomb the crap out of it, artillery, bomb the crap out of it, bomb it, bomb it, bomb it until it's just rubble, right? Well, that's what happened. Bombed it till it was rubble. The problem was a lot of these, if not all of them, these buildings. Stalin had decreed that these buildings be made of reinforced concrete, and what you have there is fairly strong material, but also rebar, and this rebar prevents a lot of collapsing. It keeps the primary structure intact. And so what you have is when these bombs are falling, they're blowing out the roofs of these things, and they're blowing a lot of holes in buildings, but they're not collapsing the buildings in total. So you've got the initial bombings, which, like I just said, blow the roofs off and stuff and create a bunch of Swiss cheese houses. But then the next wave of bombings that come through fall and explode. And as these buildings are now ventilated, the blast is not contained such that this ventilations allow the blast to escape. Whereas if it was a contained area, the building would explode by definition and collapse completely. This isn't happening though. And in the end, all this bombing really did was create a superstructure of rubble from which the Russians could defend. Just nooks and crannies and crevices and holes and everything in between with which you could hide in and defend. So now I'm not sure what the Germans were thinking, but after the initial bombing, they sent in armor units. I guess they were doing what worked in the past. It worked in the past, so we'll do it again. But they needed to change, honestly, their tactics here. You don't send a bunch of armor into a urban area that is full of rubble and buildings with no room to maneuver, with buildings that allow people to get above the tanks and fire down on top of them with, obviously tanks have weaker armor on the top. It's just a bad recipe. It's a recipe for disaster when it comes to armor. Nevertheless, Germans send in a bunch of armor, and it comes to naught. It really accomplishes nothing. And like I said, the tanks couldn't maneuver. They're vulnerable targets. And then also you hear of stories of rats infesting the tanks, um, chewing on electrical wires. So you've got these tanks there, and they're getting blown up left and right. And the ones that do survive, they're having inner mechanical failures because of mice and rats that are hanging out inside, chewing up the wires. So the whole armor thing was just a mess. And this, really, this is an arena for infantry. That's it. The bombing, it isn't doing anything. The armor isn't accomplishing anything. You just got to send the infantry in. And that's what happens. It turns into what is called Rattenkrieg, which is a battle of the rats. So the Russians, of course, benefit to the utmost from this environment. As I said, they're burrowing and through walls, um, digging through basements, using basements as bunkers. Not that the Germans aren't also doing this, but the Russians really seem to be adept at this. This is still somewhat new for the Germans fighting in this more or less urban hell. You got to remember the Germans are used to these big open areas that allow them to accomplish grand encirclements, and they're able to pull this stuff off in a relatively rapid amount of time. They're not used to being bogged down in a particular area with no armor support or little armor support, uh, no way to maneuver. They're just stuck. They're mired down in this rubble, and the Russians seem to be thriving in this type of combat. Another thing you got is snipers. Again, not that the Germans didn't have this as well, but the Russian culture, they have a whole thing that applauds sharpshooting. This is a pastime that is celebrated, and people, men and women alike, learned how to sharpshoot and be good with rifles because this is an honored tradition. So you've got a ton of people that are this close to already being snipers, and they're thrown into the mix, and they're doing quite well. You also have to remember a couple of things regarding snipers. The scopes on the Russian rifles are easier to zero in. And this might sound trivial, but when it comes to the German scopes, you have to use a certain tool to zero in your scope, and this takes time and it takes more shots to do so than it does with the Russian rifles. The Russians' scopes doesn't require a tool to zero them in, and they can do this in less shots, which saves time, so that helps. And then you also have to take into account the Russian winter, um, which is never a good thing. And yes, it affects both sides, but you're looking at like minus 40 degrees at some of the worst days. And a couple of things that are affected is, of course, equipment. Anything that's mechanical gets affected by this as well as humans. But an interesting thing that I saw on a documentary, and this entails the gun oil. And with the gun oil in their guns, it got so cold this stuff would just turn to jelly. But the Russians added gasoline to their gun oil, which kept it more in more of a liquid state and allowed them to easily fire their weapons. I thought that was interesting. But also, the clothing that each side wore made a difference. And the Germans, now listen to this, the Germans had a steel helmet with tight fitting wool clothes, and they froze to death. They were freezing. And the Russians, they didn't wear a helmet. They wore a faux fur hat because this kept them warm. And this was staying warm was more important, I guess, than the possibility of shrapnel catching you in the head as they wore these fur hats. But they also wore padded, loose-fitting, quilted cotton coats, and this allowed them to stay warmer a lot better than the wool coats of the Germans. Disease is rampant during this time. The conditions are horrid. Sewers blown open, dead bodies everywhere. Not a lot of good water to drink from. You've got dysentery, you got typhus, you got lice, and these are the least of your problems. So the Russians very quickly tried to remedy the situation, and what they did is right off the bat start producing vaccines for a lot of these diseases, and in the field administering these vaccines. I don't know if the Germans, I don't think they were quite as lucky to benefit from this. Also, you've got malnutrition and starving going on, particularly on the German side. They're suffering from severe malnutrition and even starving to death. And it's determined that they're not getting any fat in their diet. Their hearts and a lot of their organs are atrophying, and they're having cardiac arrests. So the Germans decide it's probably be a good idea to introduce some fat into their diet. And all this does is speed up the deaths, and they can't figure out what the hell's going on. No fat, dying. Introduce fat, dying worse. And what they finally figure out is you have to introduce this anything that has a high fat content into a diet that has been void of fat content. You have to introduce this stuff in a gradual manner. If you introduce it in too high of a content too fast, it affects the sulfate levels in the body, and this can result in a cardiac arrest. So as the days go on, I think the Germans realize they're going to die here. And rather than allow Paulus to retreat, Hitler issues a statement which basically, in so many words, says, you better eat one of your own bullets rather than surrender. But Paulus, I guess, being only human, does in fact surrender, and as Stalingrad becomes encircled, with the counterattack that began on November 19th of 1942, it's the end, and he does surrender. And ironically, I think the only way to really win the Battle of Stalingrad was to, I guess Germany could have pulled like a Leningrad thing and besieged the city, and just focused on cross-river traffic by way of Luftwaffe and just hold out. Otherwise, this is what the Russians did: surrounded the city and took it. So that's what happened, and that is a very, very brief overview of the Battle of Stalingrad. Of course, this becomes Germany's first major defeat of the war, and Rommel narrowly avoided this honor or dishonor because he disobeyed Hitler in Africa. And if he'd have done what Hitler wanted, that might have become the first major defeat of Germany. But as it was, Rommel retreated and in so doing saved an army. So as I said, that's a basic overview of Stalingrad. But if you look at your situation maps, there's some landmarks that are important to this battle. And It's about August 23rd, if we can back up. It's about August 23rd. You've got 16th Panzer in Renock, and this is how close they get. They're staring across the Volga into the steppes in Asia beyond, and they're just having visions and fantasizing what it's like because beyond is Asia, and you know, yeah, they're envisioning being there and what it's like, and it has to be just surreal. They've come so far, and this probably sets it in concrete. They're staring into Asia. That's how far they've come. So, what's going on here? Well, you could ask, why is it now that the defenders of Stalingrad, the Russians, why is it now that they decide to fight? Up until this point, they've pretty much been fighting, pulling back, fighting, pulling back. Why is it here that they seem to make a stand? Well, there's a number of things. I think Stalin perhaps had something to do with this. He issued his famous "not one step back" order, and I think anybody that was willing to step back would have been shot. People were being forced to fight at gunpoint, literally. And I think a lot of the common Russian soldiers in the field realized that if they lost Stalingrad, they might in fact lose the war. So, the reality of loss and what that entailed, I think, had finally set in. They had pulled back about as far as they could pull back and had to make a stand. So I guess this was Stalin's Borodino, if you will. So if you look at your situation maps, you might notice in the south, giant grain silo, and then ferry crossing over on the Volga. And then to the north, you should see some high ground. This is a big giant hill known as Mamayev Kurgan, which becomes strategic in the battle. You also have main railroad station near the ferry, and this is defended by the NKVD, who are some crack fighting troops. And this station changes hands 3 times over a period of 2 hours, which is mind-boggling, but that's what happened there. And you have to remember that the whole place had to have just been nightmare-like, like a living nightmare. You've got huge, vast oil tanks along the river, burning, spewing towers of flames that emit this eerie, flickering glow over the skeletal city, as well as reflected in the black river that flanks the city. And death everywhere, literally, in the air and on the ground. And you have to bear this in mind, as this must take its toll over time, being in this type of environment. But then you're looking at September 17th in the grain silo, and this is defended by 50 Russians who for 6 days hold out against wave after wave of attacks. And only when they run out of ammo do they surrender. You also have on a September 22nd, after changing hands 15 times, the railroad station is secured by the Germans. And at this point, the Germans hold 2/3 of the city. When you hear things like the grain silo changing hands 15 times, the railroad station changing hands 3 and 4 times, how demoralizing that must be to risk your life and see your friends die in an effort to take something that you've already taken again and again and again, only to lose it again and again and have to take it again. I mean, it just has to be demoralizing. Yet these guys continue to fight on and on for this stuff. September 27th, 30 men of the 13th Guards hold out in what becomes known as Pavlov's house. This is a famous landmark named after their leader, Yakov Pavlov, the leader of the group, which overlooks the city center. And here, the Russians aren't dumb. They've got a place that overlooks the city center. What do? Well, you position an artillery observer there, and every day thereafter, the Germans make repeated attempts to take this house. Again, the same place. You failed to take it yesterday. You failed to take it the day before yesterday, but you're going to do it again today, and you're going to try again tomorrow. I mean, my lord, it's got to be just you have to put yourself in the mindset of these guys and go, what the hell's the point? Nevertheless, the Germans make repeated attempts to take Pavlov's house. And then on September 30th, you have Hitler with his pompous ass making a speech that boasts of how Stalingrad has pretty much already fallen. It's just a matter of time. I mean, there's a few pockets of resistance here and there, but more or less it's fallen. Just a matter of time before it's officially ours. Might as well start popping the corks. So another thing to help the Russians out is along the banks of the Volga that flank the city. They had artillery dug in, and what they would do is pull the artillery out and fire, and then push them back into these dugouts, which made them pretty much impervious to any counter battery fire. You couldn't knock these things out, and that really helped the Russians out quite a bit throughout this battle. October 10th, if you look at your maps, find the factory area. This stretches along 6 miles, and there's four key areas. You've got the going from north to south, the tractor factory, the barricades armaments factory, the Red October metalworks, and then finally the southernmost location, the Lejeune chemical plant. These are all highly contested areas. Intense, bitter fighting will take place in these areas, and the Soviets basically what they've done is turn this area into a hotbed of resistance. So by now, only 1/10 of Stalingrad is under Soviet control. It seems like the Germans pretty much got this in the bag, but the Soviets are not giving up. They keep crossing the river, they keep reinforcing, they keep holding out. Pockets of resistance turn up. A building that you took yesterday is now forfeited as the Russians have overrun you. Nothing is certain, and there's no permanence anywhere. Everything is changing hands constantly. November 11th, there's a final push by the Germans that take place, and an assault is directed at the railway embankment along the Lejeune chemical plant. From above, the Luftwaffe pilots describe this curved embankment as the tennis racket, as that's the shape that it resembles. November 12th, the assault grinds to a halt, and after 81 days, the river is beginning to freeze. Winter is here. And you hear just tons and tons of horror stories regarding winter. People freezing, people's limbs freezing. It's just awful. You have disease to worry about. You have to try and take a building that either you've already taken 15 times or you've tried to take half a dozen times and haven't been able to. You just want to take a piss or get a drink of water, and you got to worry about snipers. There's no rest, night or day. It's just constant. So the bottom drops out when the Russians decide to encircle Stalingrad. And what they do is, well, you have the Romanian Third Army northwest of Stalingrad and the Romanian Fourth Army in the south. And you can't necessarily blame the Romanians because a lot of people point their finger and go, "Oh, what? Yeah, the Romanians. Their lines broke and the Russians smashed through. Big surprise." Well, not so fast. I mean, there was only so much equipment to go around, and Hitler had to decide what areas required what. And apparently, he decided that this Romanian armies covering the flanks didn't need a lot of equipment, and they didn't have a lot. What they had was crap, or they had nothing. So when the Russians came steamrolling through, that's exactly what happened. They steamrolled through. The Romanians were insufficiently equipped to deal with that, and on November 22nd, it was apparent what was happening. This is now known as Operation Uranus, and on November 23rd, the circle closes shut. That's it. Sixth Army, Paulus surrenders. That's the end of it. Stalingrad, the entire army, all for what? It's amazing. So we've already talked about a number of games you can play, but I'll focus on one in particular. And that, of course, as I mentioned already, is Turning Point Stalingrad, the Avalon Hill game. So if you have this game, you can feel free to follow with me, open it up, wax nostalgic as it were. But I have this thing. It is beautiful. You've got two hard-mounted maps. Each one folds into fours, but they connect into one pretty good-sized map board. The artwork is close to outstanding. I'm not going to say outstanding, but it's up there. It's pretty damn good. And again, it's area movement, and almost each area, has something special. You've got Mamiya of Kurgan. You've got your central railway station. You have all the key landmarks and even more. There's a ton of them on here to fight over. But again, basic area movement game, not unlike Storm over Arnhem or Thunder at Casino or even Breakout Normandy. Can be played solitaire or with two people. And right off the bat, one of the cool things that this game has is engineer and pioneer units. And I may not have mentioned this in the history, but engineers played a vital role throughout the Battle of Stalingrad, especially when it comes to things like blasting out strong points, or what if the enemy's say held up in a basement, you want to blast it out or take a flamethrower to it. You call in the engineers or pioneers. Another cool thing about this game is called they call rubble setup. And after all units have set up in their initial positions, the German must make a rubble die roll for rubble creation in each area containing a white rubble symbol to reflect the German terror bombing of the city before the battle. Similarly, you have rubble fortifications, and rubble reflects both man-made fortifications such as barricades, minefields, wire, anti-tank ditches in the advantageous defensive terrain, and natural obstacles to movement caused by bombardment. Consequently, rubble can be created randomly by bombardment or by design through the application of resources to create fortifications. So they're very mindful of terrain in this game, specifically rubble, and that's basically what the city was. You've got night turns, which is very cool. It says German air superiority caused the battle to take on a different character each time the sun set or rose over the Volga. Russian movement during daylight hours was risky, as lurking Stukas seemed constantly overhead to pounce on targets of opportunity. To cross the Volga in daylight was akin to suicide. The Russians, always better night fighters than the Germans anyway, depended on the night to resupply, reinforce, pull back, and infiltrate back into positions lost to the Germans by day. The Germans controlled the streets by day, but the Russians held sway in the ruins, sewers, alleys, and gullies by night. The game mirrors this characterization of the battle as the Germans press forward by day and the Russians struggle to plug the gaps by night, each hoping for more impulses during his time to accomplish the many things he needs to do. You have something called the advantage, and I don't think this is necessarily particular to this game, but I'll go over it. The advantage has a twofold purpose. Strategically, it represents the hoarding of resources for a major offensive, in that it can be used to increase the number of actions undertaken in any one given day or night per week. It can also be used tactically to reflect the fighting edge that one side may temporarily have over the other. The basis for such an advantage may include such factors as changes in morale, position, weather, surprise, leadership, or fate. One of the players is always considered to have the advantage, as symbolized by placement of the turn marker with the controlling side's symbol face side up. The German starts the game with the advantage, and whenever a player uses the advantage, he must flip the turn marker to depict his opponent's new possession of it. So that's pretty cool. Um, Regarding disruption and spent units, except for regrouping and retreating, action may only be taken by fresh units. Every action taken by a unit will disrupt it to some degree and cause it to be flipped to its white spent side. Disruption represents a loss of fighting efficiency, especially the ability to attack due to combat losses, exhaustion, lack of supply, or simply being in transit between prepared positions. The amount of time each spent unit needs to be refreshed and again capable of offensive action does vary with the tasks performed and the vagaries of fate. Such a resurgence can reflect the influx of replacements for combat losses, but is more likely to represent the simple passage of time necessary for a force to rest, resupply, dig in, or push on in an aggressive manner. As far as supply goes, you have to function normally, units must not start their impulse beneath an isolation marker. All units must trace supply at the start of their dawn impulse through friendly controlled areas to their respective supply sources, and German units trace their supply to certain friendly controlled zones, while the Russians trace supply respectively to their certain friendly controlled zones. As far as armor replacements go, Russian motorized mechanized units in Stalingrad were limited primarily to those remnants which began the battle as part of the 62nd Army on the West Bank. Once the battle was joined, Russian reinforcements from the east were limited primarily to infantry formations. However, the Dzerzhinsky tractor works on the West Bank continued to turn out tanks throughout the battle, and I forgot to mention this, that this was in fact the case, that these factories were pumping out stuff to the very end, and especially with this Dzerzhinsky tractor works, which was pumping out tanks as the fighting went on. It's pretty intense. This tractor works on the West Bank continued to turn out tanks throughout the battle. Manned by factory workers, these unpainted armored fighting vehicles were often driven off the assembly lines and straight into battle. And then artillery represents the fire of offboard and onboard indirect artillery fire. German artillery was constantly hampered by a lack of ammunition and therefore had to hoard shells for use in preparatory bombardments for major offensives. Consequently, they are limited to a maximum of one attack every 4 days for offensive purposes, but may always be used defensively for counter battery or interdiction, while Russian artillery, although hampered by ammo shortages as well, they had other problems, not the least of which was German air superiority, which combined with their extremely effective counter battery procedures knocked out the Russian guns time and again. Consequently, the Russians took elaborate precautions and could not concentrate their fire long without drawing devastating counter battery fire. They therefore dug their guns into protective bunkers, which limited their field of fire in contrast to the mobile German batteries, which changed position frequently. To reflect this, the artillery rules vary for each side. German air superiority was instrumental in orchestrating the course of the battle. The paralyzing effect the Luftwaffe had on the Russians is reflected in many ways beyond the attack capabilities of its lone unit, including the reduced Russian daylight movement capability, artillery suppression, and the very character of the day-night impulse system. The Russian Air Force was limited primarily to night nuisance raids and was largely ineffective by comparison until Operation Uranus broke on November the 19th and the Russians drew an ever-tightening noose around the doomed Sixth Army. And then as far as reinforcements, barring a breakthrough, Russian reinforcements may enter play only during a night impulse and only through one of the 9 areas containing a ferry landing. Each entry point must also be controlled by the Russians to allow entry. And then the Germans get chances of preventing Russian reinforcements from entering play and are dependent on the number of interdiction points the German player currently has. So how do you win this thing? It has all the names of the victory point areas in red. So that would include 3 hills to the north, as well as Orloika, and finally Mamayev Kurgan, centrally located closer to the river. As well, the German scores 1 victory point for every riverbank area without a ferry landing he currently controls, and 2 victory points for each one containing one of the 9 Russian ferry landings. 3 victory points for controlling Mamayev Kurgan for a possible total of 28 victory points. Additionally, the German must be able to trace supply to his victory point areas at the end of the week to claim those victory points. And you have just a few special rules regarding impulses, advantage, as well as opening bombardment. It also lists an introductory scenario, which is very cool, with examples of play as well as illustrations and some charts. So that is Turning Point in Stalingrad, and you would think, or you would hope, that they would have included some designer's notes, but it wouldn't be the case. Mr. Greenwood was a busy man, didn't have the time to include those. I will forgive him. But it's a great game. I've played this, and I remember staring at this thing a long time ago online before I knew there was such a thing as Board Game Geek. And yes, even during a time when I had no idea that these things were sold on eBay. But when I figured all this out, I grabbed a copy up and fell in love. So it's a great game. Um, a little in depth. I wouldn't recommend it if you're a newbie, but if you played a few games, especially any of the other area movement games in this series, then you should have no problem. And especially if you are a fan of Stalingrad, this is what you want. There's a couple other good ones out there that are playable, that are decent simulations as far as the history goes, but as far as the best of all possible things that need to be included in a Stalingrad game, this is the game you want. Turning Point Stalingrad by Avalon Hill, out of print. You might pay anywhere from 30 to 50 or more depending on the condition, but pick up a copy. You won't be sorry, and you'll simultaneously impress your friends. So I guess that's it for this episode. An episode that ran longer than I had intended. If nothing else, been because I am still suffering from residual sick, which may have come through. I hope it wasn't too annoying. Um, Perhaps should have tried to figure out how to get sponsored by NyQuil, as I'm loaded on that. Either way, that is episode 29. Hope you enjoyed it. And as far as future episodes, two or three things that will be happening very soon. Not sure when, but soon. North Africa episode is definitely going to happen, as well as got a request for Waterloo, but trying to space those Napoleonic shows out a bit. And then, of course, Kursk. I mean, no self respecting military history slash gaming podcast can refer to itself as such without covering that, so that has to happen. And finally, I'll just issue a fair warning that the next episode may be delayed a bit. I might be looking at a possible trip to St. Louis, which would cause that, and got a lot on my plate in the real world, so just bear that in mind. So thanks for listening, and keep gaming.